Hello. I'm just going to talk until everyone is on the stage. La, la, la. And take out my cheat sheet. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. It looks like a full room, which is wonderful. I'd like to introduce 3 early careers individuals who are working in AI at financial institutions here right in Toronto. And so while I'm kind of introducing them, think about what questions you might want to ask them and where you kind of see yourself in the next few years. So right to my left here is Omar Nada. He is a data scientist and recommender systems expert at the Royal Bank of Canada. He specializes in, well, building end-to-end recommender systems. And he has had various roles in recommender systems, particularly as a machine learning engineer for the September. And he has a master's in computer science and was previously a teaching assistant at Ryerson University. And prior to that, he had his bachelor's in bioinformatics from Simon Fraser University. Over right to the left of Omar is Aparna Chugh. She is an analytics consultant for Enterprise Advanced Analytics from CIBC. She's always been interested in working in financial services, and she has several years' experience working at various financial service institutions, not just here in Canada, but also as an analytics advisor for health, safety, and environment at Rio Tinto and a business analyst for valueserve.com. She is graduated from a Master's of Statistics at Delhi University, but also one of the recognized programs that Adam mentioned earlier, the Master of Business Analytics at the Schulich School of Business at York. So she works daily with teams across the bank to help develop business insights and build predictive models that help serve the clients. And last but not least, right over there on the very, very left, or your very, very right, is Tarun Gupta, who works at the Bank of Montreal as a manager of data science. He works at the Enterprise Machine Learning Center of Excellence in Toronto, finding machine learning solutions for different strategic priorities and multiple lines of business across the bank. He has his postdoctoral fellowship from the University of Vermont, where he used unsupervised methods for detecting molecular anomalies in live developing embryos under extreme climate conditions. Prior to that, he obtained his Ph.D. in neuroscience from the University of Montana, and prior to that, his master's in human genomics from Punjab University in India. So a very interesting and diverse group we have up here. Just to get started, I'm just going to start with you, Omar, and we'll move down the line. Could you tell me a little bit about what it's like in your current role and why you became interested in AI, especially in financial services?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for coming and thanks for inviting me. I'll start with working in the financial industry is really, really great and amazing because the amount of data and the amount of diversity in the data and the diversity in projects is just extremely important, especially in the AI. And the way I came about AI was I was just trying a machine learning course back in my bachelor's in Vancouver. And I was fascinated by how much you can do with very simple amount of information, and I decided to get my master's here.
Aparna?
Sure. So for me, after completing my master's of statistics, just being such an applied course, I was just always interested in analytics. And then with what I do with CIBC is, especially at an enterprise level, you actually have access to a lot of information, and you're not kind of confined to, say, one line of business, which is equally interesting but challenging as well because it restricts you with what data accesses you have. And then with AI, there's just so much that you can do when it comes to having that client experience and client engagement as well. So,
yeah, I'll second that as well. So as an enterprise function, you get a view of multiple lines of business, and often you get the opportunity to connect the different dots that the lines themselves may not be able to connect, perhaps. I didn't really have a machine learning background, and so I was just using machine learning in my postdoc to make my own life easier, and somehow I stumbled into this.
Wonderful. So I'm sure everyone's kind of curious where they'll be like in 1 to 2 years and what their roles would be like. So just to start off with Omar again, could you tell us about what it's like working in your current roles, what your day-to-day life is like?
So working at RBC, basically one of the most important skills that we have is just trying to understand exactly what the project is about, right? So sure, you want to build a recommender engine, but what does it exactly do, and what is the data or what's the input for it? That's the most important thing you need to have as a start. And from there, and I'm lucky to be working actually at very, very, very smart people, is brainstorming and trying to come up with the most optimal solution to a problem, whether it's going to be research or whether it's going to be like one of the efficient models. It's the brainstorming session that will actually bring it up, and there can be a lot of different things that could be done, and there's a lot of growth potential in the financial market right now for them.
Okay. So for me, I would second that. Like, it is about understanding the business, and especially as an enterprise function, you have access, or you kind of work with different lines of businesses. So a day is always about switching in terms of what meetings you go to. So for example, a retail business, and the way you would want to model or have access to their information would be very different from what you would do for a business banking. The challenge is basically, or what it is exactly, because the legacy systems that exist, and in terms of how do you kind of curate that data, and that makes sense to what can feed into a model. So as Rashi said, that modeling is actually a part of a very small component, but it is about understanding the business and how do you kind of give it back as well. Like, how do you make it more explainable?
Yeah, I think we are in a very interesting time and phase in terms of maturity around data, around different tools that talk to each other or not. And often different lines would use different legacy platforms, and they may generate data that would be populated into systems that don't necessarily talk to each other, right? So there are multiple challenges. And so being at this time in the industry, within the financial sector, puts you in a position where you can sort of see that process transform itself. And that's quite exciting, I think.
Great. So earlier when Adam mentioned who was looking for an AI job, almost all of you put your hands up. So I think everyone is kind of curious, how did these people find their AI jobs? So we'll start over here from Omar to tell us a little bit about how they went about finding their current roles.
So that was, well, first I joined one of the AI communities in here, where we discussed a lot of papers and deep dive into so many different research topics. From there, I got to know really smart people, and surprisingly, they were almost all of them working at RBC, so they got me very excited to join there. And I applied for recommended systems team, and I got in. So it's all about the connection and the community.
Which is why you're all here today. Over to you,
Exactly.
Aparna.
Yeah. So for me, I would say networking is essential. Like, I understand being in school, you probably have like a lot of pressure in terms of assignments, exams, whatnot. But it is the networking that actually made me where I am right now. During the part of the school, I was like, I ensured that I get to meet one new person every week. And in that case, that actually helped me define in terms of where I really wanted to see myself. Because it, like, you know, the conversations really help you kind of narrow down and eliminate certain domains, regions like wherein you would not want to be a part of. So it's just, I would say, network as much, and then be, especially like, you know, just kind of know it all, but you still need to be very specific in terms of where do you see yourself in specific.
So the way I found my job was through, so I did a fellowship called Insight Data Science Fellowship, and it's meant for PhDs and postdocs in academia who are in quantitative fields, be it biology, physics, theoretical physics, mathematics, etc. And if you already are in that field and you're trying to make a transition into machine learning, then there's a fellowship for that. And then at the end of that fellowship, they connect you to different employers. And we got connected to all the financial sector employers in Toronto, and got my job.
Great. So now I'm going to open it up to the floor. And to incentivize your questions, I have these lovely, I am doing this with one hand, Vector t-shirts up for grabs for the first two questions. And you can find me and get one afterwards. So as earlier, if you have any questions, please line up on the sides. And I see someone getting up right there. Oh, who's going to be the first?
You sold me a T-shirt.
T-shirt.
I just had a question. So obviously, there's a lot of new master's programs popping up in data science, analytics, things like that, and students often have choices of electives. What do you think if you were a student right now in one of these programs and you had choices of courses or projects or things like that? What would you make sure to get out of these programs in order to prepare you for a career in industry?
Okay, so from my own perspective, I would go deep dive into the math and algorithms before getting to the machine learning aspect of it. And the reason is, yes, there's a lot of packages right now that you can use to do the simple models and even the the hard models or the more complicated models, but if you don't know how it works from the back end, you'll be always limited to the very basics of it, right? So knowing the math and knowing the actual algorithm behind them, in my opinion, is the most important thing from R. But
I would actually second your thought, because it's really important to understand what sits underneath instead of just like building a model, right? Because say, for example, if you're using Python, there are a lot of packages and it just gives you the result. But then you need to know what actually went behind it, right? And that is how you kind of make it explainable as well. So when it comes to electives, for me, it would be actually, I actually had a good combination of electives wherein I actually did a lot of math or quant heavy so that I understood the basics, but then I did get into AI as well. And that is the balance that I would probably recommend that you should do.
As a student, I would make sure that you can communicate your findings and your results, and you can think critically. It's often hard to know everything, and nobody can really. At the end of the day, what we are looking for is somebody who can actually go and learn something on the fly and then communicate that finding.
Great. A question over here.
Yes, hi. When you guys were in school, how did you overcome the fact that you need to build your portfolio with real-world projects when in school you're only exposed to open source data sets and not real-life projects?
Great question.
I guess I was a bit lucky that when I was doing my master's, I wanted always to do something more special, so I approached a lot of different companies to get hold of their data set and build a recommender engine for them, and one of them agreed, and that's where I worked as a machine learning engineer. So that's what I did. I did most of the work basically trying to approach small companies and tell them these are my skills, let me help you, and some of them agreed at the end. So yeah, I'll try going that way.
I would say probably Kaggle is the best way. Like, you don't necessarily have to challenge yourself to be in the leaderboard, but then even if you get to some level of, model accuracy and stuff like that, I would really recommend that. And there's like tons of competitions that are open on Kaggle. So that does help you kind of, because that's not the clean kind of data that you would actually expect while in school, right? So that is the real data that you would actually have.
Another sort of suggestion would be to look at all the problems that you are currently dealing with in your life and figure out, how you can potentially apply some of these tools and techniques to solve those problems. When I was living in Montana, and I was trying to figure out where should I live next, right? So I thought maybe I should move to Canada, and I didn't know anybody in Canada, and so I was like, well, that's an interesting problem. Perhaps I should gather some data. Perhaps there should be some sort of recommendation engine of sorts that can tell me, what's the optimal way to, perhaps optimize my preferences and find a place to go, right? So if you can't work with any real life data from businesses, if you can show a portfolio that illustrates your curiosity and the steps you have taken to implement some sort of data-driven solutions to that, I think that's a good approach.
Thank you.
Your turn.
So I had a question that's more of a follow-up to the first question. You mentioned that one thing that helps to differentiate graduate students is to show that you have a understanding of the theory behind the algorithms, to show that you're not just implementing. How would you indicate that in a job application, like a resume or a cover letter?
So it's in my opinion, yeah, sure, you can have the best project on your portfolio, but when you go to the interview and they ask you the very basics of those questions and you don't have the theory behind it, you're not going to be able to answer. Projects help you to get to the interview, but what helps you to get the job and even escalate in the job is knowing the theory and knowing the math behind that. So yes, you have to have projects, definitely. Otherwise, you don't have any practical experience to the theory that you learned. But what's more important in my perspective is the theory.
What I would recommend is that please do not leave out on putting a cover letter to the application. Like, that is essential, because that's the canvas that you can wear and you can write and differentiate yourself from amongst others as well, right? Because that is wherein you would be able to express your passion towards what you're doing and why are you interested in that job at the very first place. So I know I kind of did a lot of mistakes as well when I was going through that process. But then that is one essential advice that I would like to give.
I suppose some credibility comes through your association with places like Vector or in recognized programs, right? So if employers recognize that you are part of a program that's rigorous, so that sort of takes that burden away a little bit. My focus is always, if I can explain an algorithm to my mom who knows nothing about anything in machine learning field, and if you can translate that, perhaps in a simple English, either as you're describing your projects, in a way that communicates what you did. That's what I look for.
Thank you.
So it seems no one has any questions, so I'm going to throw one back out there because Aparna brought up something very interesting, which are mistakes that she's made. So far in your career journey, could you tell us about a mistake that you've made so far and lessons to everyone in the audience and how to avoid them?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I would just go back to the cover letter thing as well. So I actually had an exam the next day, and there was a deadline to which I did not see for a job application, and I was like, oh, I got to choose what I do, right? And then I just decided to put in my application in, to which I noticed that I had made a silly mistake in there. And you guys can obviously guess what that silly mistake would have been, but then when you realize that, there are times wherein you got to manage and you got to have you need to be calm in those situations, right? Like you can study, you can put in an extra effort, but then it's about how do you get it right and make that first impression, right? So yeah.
For me, it's the amount of applications. It's like the mistake that I did was applying to every job posting, whether I liked it or not, and that was a big mistake that I had. Like from being now and looking back at myself, I wouldn't apply for older positions because I got some of them and I didn't even want to go. So there was no point of applying from the beginning.
I would say a mistake for me was not having my priorities in place. So for instance, often people with Ph.D. backgrounds are driven by curiosity, and that sort of determines what projects you take on. And so in that perspective, I suppose you have to also align your priorities with the business priorities and what employers value.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. I'm going to throw more out there then. What is one thing that, the most important thing that you've learned through your master's degree, or in Tarun's case, through your PhD, that you think everyone who was entering an AI career should know?
There can be a lot of things. Well, honestly, it's all, whatever work you do will be paid off eventually. Like, it's, from my perspective, like you can never be a perfect data scientist in all the fields, right? You cannot be a perfect NLP expert or a commander system expert deep learning. It will never happen, in my opinion. It's much better to see something that you like, that interests you, and tackle that, and eventually it will be paid off. So that will be one big thing that I will advise.
For me, I would say the most critical definitely is the technical aspect, but then your soft skills matter. Like for me, having graduated from a business school, like that is what was actually keyed into us, right? Like it is about not doing the math or not building the model, but it is about how do you communicate? How do you talk to people with 50 people in a room, right? So that communication, that soft skills is the essential part in alignment definitely with the technical skills that one would need.
Sorry, could you rephrase put the question?
One biggest thing that you would recommend to anyone who is entering an AI career?
Right. I would say if you are entering in an AI career, perhaps it helps to understand that there are many different types of data scientist roles, and they vary quite a lot from each other. So if you have personal priorities, let's say that you only want to work from 9 to 5, it probably doesn't make sense to go into a cybersecurity team that's involved in incident response, right? So in that context, knowing what sort of data science you want to do can put you in a direction that might be quite different from where you might end up if you don't think about it.
Great. I see a question over here.
So I see that all of you guys are like data science and analytics. How often do you use like deep learning techniques in the industry? Like apart from like machine learning and like data analytics, like how often do you use like something that would be called deep learning?
Great question.
Well, I guess I can take that proudly. I'm currently building a deep learning recommender engine, and we already have a patent for it already. So, yeah, I've been working on that project for 10 months now.
So I personally don't use it as much, but then we definitely have a team that uses, like that is definitely the AI research and the advanced analytics. So they do end up like with all of, like doing the deep learning models and stuff.
I would say it depends on the nature of the problem. If it's of regulatory concern, where you do need explainability, in that context, we wouldn't necessarily go that route. But then there are instances, let's say if the application that you're developing is for primarily internal use, that's not going to have any sort of impact directly to the customers, especially in an automatic way. And then instance, I think you have more of a leverage to use whatever techniques that you want to use.
Thanks.
Great. So I think I'm going to ask one last question to our wonderful people up there. So I always like to give people time to brag about themselves and their accomplishments, and it'll be kind of, aspirational for you to see what these wonderful people are doing so early on in their careers. So I'd like to take a moment to ask you, what accomplishments so far in your AI career would you like to share with us today?
Well, for me, number one is actually joining amazing kind of people at RBC, like in our data science, starting from my coworkers up until the managers. They're all very supportive and extremely smart people. This is one of the biggest accomplishments that I personally gained out of working as a data scientist right now. Second thing is 10 months in, and this is by the help of the people I work with, 10 months in for my second job and the first job actually in a corporate life, I already have a patent as a main inventor for RBC, and anything that I require to actually escalate in my career, it's always being supported from the managerial level, and I think that's my biggest accomplishment. Yeah.
Great.
For me, I think the biggest accomplishment is that being new into this position, it is about the team support that you get, and then you being the face of the projects that you lead, right? So it is about like working with different projects while you're new, but then you get to be the face as well. So it's not that since you're new, you just be the backbone or just sit behind, but it is about getting that face time.
I think my biggest accomplishment has been to recognize that there's life outside ivory tower and having the courage to leave academia.
Great. What a wonderful way to end off. So I'd like to take a moment to thank these wonderful panelists for their time today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And not drop them. And I will hand it over back to Melissa. Come find